Somewhere over the Gulf of Finland, in the early hours of July 4th, air traffic and shipping near the Finnish port of Kotka went quiet. Finland's defense forces had temporarily shut it down, not because anything landed on Finnish soil, but because of what was happening a short way to the east, over one of the best defended cities in Russia. Ukrainian drones had reached St. Petersburg. This is Russia's second city, more than 850 kilometers from the nearest point on Ukraine's border. It sits deep in the rear, the kind of place that's supposed to be untouchable. And overnight, drones struck the St. Petersburg oil terminal and the naval base at Kronstadt. We know this isn't a Ukrainian boast, because St. Petersburg's own governor, Alexander Beglov, confirmed the terminal was hit. When the enemy's own officials corroborate you, you don't need to inflate anything. Regional authorities said dozens of drones were shot down over the wider Leningrad area, with one woman injured by falling debris, and Russia's defense ministry claimed hundreds more brought down across the country that same night. Take the tally with a grain of salt, but the direction of travel is clear. The war has come home to the Russian rear. And here's what I keep turning over. For months now, Moscow has been raining missiles, drones, and glide bombs on Ukrainian cities, on apartment blocks and hospitals, trying to break Ukraine's will, one funeral at a time. It hasn't worked. So the real question is the one Russia doesn't want asked out loud. What happens when Ukraine's answer isn't more terror aimed at civilians, but a patient, deep-reaching drone war that can put fire on St. Petersburg and quietly choke off the fuel that keeps the whole Russian machine running? That's the story I want to walk through tonight, because while one side is bombing children, the other is draining the tank. Start with what happened in Kiev on July 2nd. Russia hit the capital in a mass strike, and by the time rescue crews finished clearing the rubble at the last site a day later, the toll was finalized at 30 people killed and around 100 wounded. Kiev declared a day of mourning, and among the details Mayor Klitschko shared was one that's hard to shake. A 10-year-old boy left likely orphaned, and a 15-year-old girl still listed as missing. These weren't soldiers. This was a residential attack on a Tuesday night. That's the pattern I want you to hold on to, because it repeats. In Sumy, a Russian aerial bomb came down in the center of the city and killed 4 civilians, including a child and a 61-year-old man, with 33 more people wounded. There's no front line in downtown Sumy. There's no military logic to a glide bomb landing on a street full of people. The logic is fear. The idea, going back months now, is that if you kill enough civilians and orphan enough children, a country will decide the war isn't worth surviving. And if you want the single image that tells you what this campaign actually is, it's in Lozova, in the Kharkiv region. Russian forces struck a private house and wounded 6 people, 3 of them children. One of them, a 10-year-old girl, was taken to hospital with a blast injury and burns covering about 40% of her body. She later died there. That's the war Russia is fighting from the sky. Not against Ukraine's army, but against its cities and the people in them, betting that terror does what tanks couldn't. So the question is what Ukraine does in return, and its answer looks nothing like this. Ukraine's targets are refineries, oil terminals, and the power that runs them. Take the Slavyansk refinery in Krasnodar Krai. Satellite imagery, checked independently, confirmed that a June 28 strike destroyed at least 17 storage tanks there and knocked out 2 of its distillation units, the actual machinery that turns crude into usable fuel. That's not a symbolic hit. That's a plant taken out of service. Ukraine's general staff put a cumulative picture like this. By early July 2026, they say, systematic strikes had knocked out just under 43% of Russia's projected oil refining capacity, with 8 refineries hit in the past month alone and more than 60 storage tanks damaged or destroyed. Now that's their assessment, not an independent audit, so I'd hold the exact percentage loosely. But the damage at places like Slavyansk is the concrete, verified part, and it's the part that shows up where you can't fake it, at the pump. Because here's what's happening inside Russia right now. In Chita, out in Zabaikalsky Krai, satellite images showed gas station queues stretching for kilometers, and one motorist reportedly waited 69 hours to fill up. The region started rationing gasoline by QR code. In occupied Crimea, diesel climbed to 225 rubles a liter. This is the war coming home to ordinary Russians who were told it would never touch them. If you want more of this kind of sourced breakdown rather than the hype you'll find elsewhere, subscribing genuinely helps the channel keep doing it. And the clearest sign of how real this is comes from Russia's own scramble to plug the gap. Reuters reported that Moscow is preparing to import at least 200,000 barrels of Japanese aviation fuel routed in through South Korea. Sit with that for a second. This is a country that exports oil and gas to the world, one of the largest producers on the planet, and it's quietly lining up fuel imports to keep its own aircraft flying. You don't do that if the shortage is a rumor. You do it when the numbers on the tanker manifest matter more than the ones on the propaganda broadcast. I want to be careful here, though, because this isn't about one dramatic night. Ukraine has been chipping at this for months, refinery by refinery, terminal by terminal. No single strike strangles a supply chain that size. What does it is patience, hitting the same category of target again and again until the cumulative loss outpaces Russia's ability to repair and reroute. That's the war Ukraine is actually fighting, and it's a slower, quieter, and frankly more damning story than any one fireball. So while that's happening in the rear, watch what the Kremlin was doing out front. Just ahead of American Independence Day, Putin and his top general, Valery Gerasimov, announced that Russia had fully captured Konstantinivka in Donetsk region. A clean battlefield win, delivered right on cue for a date on the calendar. There's one problem. Ukraine's general staff said the town was still under Ukrainian control and pointed to its 19th Army Corps, the Vostok Formation, repelling 11 separate Russian assaults there on July 3rd. You could dismiss that as Kyiv talking its own book, except for who contradicted it next. Russia's own defense ministry told the state news agency TASS that fighting was still going on around Konstantinivka the morning of July 4th. You can't have fully captured a town and still be fighting over it the next day. The claim falls apart from the inside, in Moscow's own words. Zelensky put it more bluntly. He said if Konstantinivka were really in Russian hands, Putin would have no trouble meeting him there. He called the capture claim a lie timed to America's holiday. And whatever you make of the theater around it, the underlying pattern is hard to miss. A Kremlin that needs to manufacture victories on the map precisely when it can't hide what's happening at home. When your fuel stations are rationing by QR code and your second largest city is getting hit by drones, a dramatic announcement about a Donbass town does useful work. It changes the subject. And there's a harder edge to this than propaganda. That same week, Ukraine's security service and the prosecutor general opened a formal war crimes case naming Gerasimov personally, tied to the July 2nd missile strike on Kyiv. the one that killed 30 people. Think about what that means. The man whose signature is on the campaign against apartment blocks is the same man announcing phantom conquests. It's the whole strategy in one figure. Terror aimed at civilians, dressed up as battlefield success. So on the question of who actually came out of this week ahead, I don't think it's close. Russia bombed cities, invented a victory its own ministry couldn't back up, and spent the days after quietly lining up foreign fuel to keep its planes in the air. Ukraine reached 850 kilometers into the Russian rear, put a war crimes case on the Kremlin's chief of the general staff, and kept its grip on the town Putin swore he'd taken. One side is winning the press release, the other is winning where it counts. Here's the thing worth sitting with. Russia has been bombing Ukrainian cities for years now, and the whole point of it was always to break something inside Ukraine, to make the fighting feel pointless and the surrender feel reasonable. It hasn't worked. Kyiv buried its dead, declared a day of mourning, and then sent drones 850 kilometers the other way. That's not a country that's breaking. That's a country that's learned to reach. And the war Ukraine is fighting in return is the kind that compounds. A missile on an apartment block is a horror, but it doesn't change the arithmetic of the war. A drained refinery does. When Russians are waiting most of 3 days in a fuel line, and Moscow is quietly arranging to buy aviation fuel from abroad, that's the machine that funds the whole invasion starting to seize up. Terror is loud and it fades. A strangled fuel supply is slow and it stays. The other reason I'd bet on Kiev here is that it isn't fighting alone, and the support keeps arriving in real forms. Zelensky spent this same stretch talking to German Chancellor Merz about more Patriot air defense missiles, the systems that actually shoot down the drones and missiles aimed at those apartment blocks. And he said Washington had decided to send more javelins. Britain's firefighting program delivered its 9th convoy of trucks, bringing the total past 169 vehicles since 2022. The unglamorous gear that puts out the fires Russia starts. And the pressure is tightening in quieter ways too, with Estonia moving to bar Russian and Belarusian nationals without residence permits from buying property starting in January 2027. None of that is a single dramatic night. All of it points the same direction. That's really the honest read on where this stands. One side is winning press releases and losing its fuel. The other is absorbing terrible blows and steadily disarming the war economy behind them. Endurance favors Kiev, and it favors the people still backing Kiev. If you want the version of this war where I show you who confirmed what before I say it landed, where a governor's own admission counts for more than a MOD press release, then subscribe and stick around, because the fuel crisis I described tonight is a trend I'll be tracking week by week as it deepens. Take a look at the other videos on the channel while you're here, and I'll see you in the next one.